Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall. Hope that you're excited to be in group this week. Looking forward to digging into God's Word together again. To get things started, an icebreaker to get you talking, off the top of your heads, how many PKs do you know? I'm not talking about preachers' kids. I'm talking about presidents' kids. Can you name any of the president's kids just off the top of your head? Let's take the easy ones off the table. President Adams' son was President John Quincy Adams, so you don't need to use that one. And President George Bush's son was President George Walker Bush. Do you know, besides those two presidents' sons who became presidents, do you know any PKs off the top of your head? I hope it's obvious why I'm asking that question. Today, we have the president of Israel, or the king of Israel, David. And he's talking about his son Solomon, the future president or king of Israel. Solomon will build what David isn't allowed to build, a house for God. So off the top of your head, do you know any PK's kids? Let's just get talking a little bit. Well, now that we're talking, we got into the part of the passage that's a little uncomfortable. We're talking about money this week. Is anyone besides your small group leader nervous? I hope that there are actually a few of you there. I hope that your small group is actually met together this week because you desire what I want, and that is to learn what does God say about handling money. I hope that my desire to talk about that hasn't tanked your small group attendance this week. Well, the next thing that I would like you to talk about after talking about PKs is this question. Without mentioning one single politician, I'd like you to talk about the national debt. First question, how often do you think about it? Do you think about the national debt daily? Do you think about it weekly? Do you think about it monthly? Do you think about it every time there's an election? Or do you just simply never think about it? On those same lines, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all and 10 being terrified, where are you at with the national debt? Do you worry about it? Not at all or all the time. And then on that same scale, 1 to 10, 1, it can't not be fixed. 10, it can be fixed. Do you think that the national debt can be fixed? Is this something that we should be working on? Now, small group leaders, I'm asking you to hold the line here. Hold everybody accountable. We're not going to talk about politics. We're not going to talk about politicians. We're not going to mention anybody's name. We're just sharing our feelings about the national debt. Well, a couple of you are thinking, are we going to talk about the Bible at all, or are we just going to talk about money? Well, let's open our Bibles to 1 Chronicles 29 if you haven't started already. And the truth be told, to understand 1 Chronicles 29, you've got to go back to chapter 28. In chapter 28, King David has a dream. He wants to build a palace for God that is grander than the palace that he's built for himself. Here, David has built this amazing palace for himself, and God is still living in a tent. And this bothers David immensely, that God's living in a tent and he has a house. So David has a dream of building God a house. But we learn in 1 Chronicles 28 that God says that David can't do that because there is blood on David's hands. He is a man of war. This leads to my next question. How does this idea, this monumental piece of the Old Testament story that David, a key character in the Old Testament, can't build the house of God because there's blood on his hands, how does this reflect on your attitude towards the Old Testament? Many think that the Old Testament is just one war after another war, countless wars. God smote this. God ordered genocide of that. Many don't like to read the Old Testament because they find it to be so bloody. My question is, what does this passage say about that view of the Old Testament? That God doesn't let David build the temple because there's blood on his hands. David just gets to do the planning. He gets to pay for it. He's like the dad. Well, are there any lessons in that? There certainly are. Next, I want everyone want to focus their eyes on 1 Chronicles 29:9. It says, "The people rejoiced, for they had given freely." The next complaint that I've heard as a pastor over and over and over again about the Old Testament is that those folks tithed because they had to, not because they wanted to. I think this is a great verse to rattle that notion. And then I have this question for you. Would you share in your group? Do you rejoice when you give on the weekend? When you give to God, do you rejoice? And if so, why? And also, what does that look like for you? What does that rejoicing look like for you? And maybe there would be someone in your group that would share that if you don't rejoice, why are you willing to give, but that you're not rejoicing in your giving? Now, let's focus on David's prayer, 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, what I focused on in my message this last weekend. First, how big is God to David? What does David's prayer say about how big God is to him? Second, who is in charge according to King David? Remember, he is king of Israel. But in his prayer, who does he say is really the one in charge? And then third, in his prayer, who does David say is in control? Or who is the owner of money? Who's in control or the owner of money? And then lastly, I'd like you to look at verse 14. And what does verse 14 say about our giving? Well, every week I like you to share what you like and what you don't like. What was your favorite thing? What was your least favorite thing? I love David and his leaders' attitude in this passage. They openly acknowledge that they are owners, not managers. They want to give back. They say, we want to give back to God what is his. We want to give back to God accordingly. I really like that attitude among the king and his leaders. What don't I like? Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't like that David didn't get to build the temple or even see it. Now, I understand it, and I agree with it, but I love David, and I just don't like that he doesn't get to see this temple built. Well, also, quick reminder of the application. This last weekend, we talked about our attitudes towards money. What do I truly own? Do I own my house? Do I own my Jeep? Do I own my iPhone? No, they all belong to God. I'm challenging you, and I'm doing this myself this week, to pray about my attitude, about what do I truly own, or that I would begin to pray that God, you would change my heart so that I would see that everything I have is on loan from you, that I'm to take care of it and to share it. Well, I sure hope that you will come back to church this next weekend and that you will come with open hearts and open minds because you want, like me, to know what does God say that we are to do with our money? How does he say that we are to handle it? Because we desire his wisdom for this difficult part of life. Hope you have a great group. God bless. Bye-bye.